guys? Welcome to the lounge. Bobby D here. I've been going over these Senate Commerce hearings with Senator Cruz on the Panama Canal, and it's very interesting and very telling how much we've been taken advantage of through our treaty, our agreement, should I say, with the Panama Canal. Carter, like an idiot, gave the canal to Panama, but there were stipulations that went along with that. And among those stipulations was that if they did not uphold the agreement, that the United States reserved the right to protect the canal through any means necessary, including military force, and to take the canal back if need be. This is kind of interesting, but it begs to differ. If we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, well, how about the American Canal? Just something to think about. What do you guys think?
Your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to questioning. I want to start, Chairman Solo, Commissioner Maffei. Are you aware of allegations from some vessel operators of disparate treatment, such as sweetheart deals or favorable rebates by Panama for canal transits?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We have become aware through some complaints by cruise lines that said that they were not getting a refund of their canal tolls. When we looked into this, we found a Panamanian Executive Order, Decree 73, that specifically says that if a cruise line would stop at a certain port, that they could be refunded 100% of the fees. And as far as I know, that's the only instance where that exists.
Yep, we continue to look into it, but the cruise ships is the one area where we have found something that would fit that bill, I think, Chairman.
Some press coverage says the Panama Canal is nominally independent, even though it provides a large share of the Panamanian government's revenue. Chairman Sola, briefly, can you describe how the FMC views the Canal Authority and the Panamanian government? Are they distinct entities or a single foreign government apparatus that controls the Panama Canal?
Mr. Chairman, our law is clear. It comes from the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 that there's only one entity. And in addition to that, our predecessor at the Federal Maritime Commission was the U.S. Shipping Board, was formed in 1916 in direct result of the Panama Canal. The very first chairman of that was George Washington Goethals, which was the very first administrator of the canal. So we look at it as one entity.
Yeah, I might just add, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
It's sort of like the Georgia Ports Authority and the state of Georgia. The Georgia Ports Authority is clearly independent. It can do its own bonds. It's got independent governance. But ultimately, Georgia is responsible for it, the state of Georgia.
Right. So Panama was the very first Latin American country to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. And right now, China is building a fourth bridge across the Panama Canal for car traffic and light rail. Chairman Solo, why should Chinese construction of a bridge near Panama City concern the United States?
Mr. Chairman, we all saw the tragedy that happened here in the Francis Scott Key Bridge incident and the devastation that had happened to Baltimore. We also saw recently what happened in the Suez Canal, where we had a ship get stuck in there. It's not only the construction of the bridge, but it's a removal of a bridge, as I understand it, called the Bridge of the Americas. It was built in 1961, and that would paralyze cargo traffic in and out of the canal.
Panama also recently renewed the concessions for 2 container ports to a Chinese company, Hutchison Ports PPC. Of course, Chinese companies are controlled by the Communist Party. How does China use control of those ports for economic gain?
Mr. Chairman, I am a regulator, a competition regulator, and the Chinese ports that you're referring to, let me put them into scope. The one on the Pacific, the Port of Balboa, is roughly the same size as the Port of Houston. They do about 4 million containers a year. They have about 28 gantry cranes. The one on the Atlantic is the same as my hometown of Miami. They do about 1 million containers. So where Roger...
Just to put this in a little bit of perspective, if China were to build a bridge and, like what happened with the Suez Canal and we get one ship stuck, or we have any issues in there, our whole shipping through the Panama Canal it's tied up. So that means our goods are tied up. A lot of stuff will be ruined. But you're talking about catastrophic supply issues for the United States, and the Chinese are obviously getting a foothold on the Panama Canal, and the United States is going to have to do something about it. We cannot sit back and let this happen.
Gunther in the Port of Houston generates about $1 billion a year, and Heidi Webb in Miami does about $200 million. The Panama Ports Company paid zero for 20 years on that concession. So it's really hard to compete against zero. So I think that's our concern, our economic concern that we would have.
Commissioner Maffei, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do too also think it is important. I would point out that you don't have to stop at either port. It's not like these two ports control the entrance to the canal. That is the Canal Authority that does control that. However, I think it's of concern. I would also point out that the Panamanian government thinks it's of concern too, because they're conducting their own audit of those particular deals. But we remain very interested as well.
So, Professor Kontorovich, I want to turn to the treaty. So, President Trump...
Before we get to this, Professor, it's my understanding that it's 2 months if you have to go around the canal. That's what the delay is in the goods. When you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stuff that's shipped into the United States every year, or from the United States, imports and exports, 2 months is hundreds of billions of dollars, and also potentially commerce that's being ruined or destroyed because they're held up at ports because everything is out of order. I mean, it's crazy.
Trump has made important arguments. Both the Chinese control over canal infrastructure and exorbitant fees charged for canal transits are violations of the Neutrality Treaty. I want to highlight 3 specific provisions that you mentioned in your opening statement. Article 4 of the Neutrality Treaty requires both the United States and Panama to establish and maintain, quote, a regime of neutrality. Article 5 limits any foreign control by providing, quote, only the Republic of Panama shall operate the canal and maintain military forces, defense sites, and military installations within its national territory. And finally, Article 3(1)(c) requires that, quote, tolls and other charges be just, reasonable, equitable, and consistent with the principles of international law. In your opinion, as an expert in international law, could the facts discussed here be considered violations of the Neutrality Treaty in force right now between the United States and Panama?
So I think, Senator, I think potentially they could, but it's impossible to say definitively without knowing more, in particular about the degree of Chinese control and involvement in these companies. I think it's important to note that these port operation companies that operate the ports on both sides, when they received their first contract, it was just a few months before Hong Kong was handed over to China. In other words, they received them as British companies, sort of very oddly, just a few months before the handover. Now, of course, since then, Hong Kong has been incorporated into China, has been placed under a special national security regime, and the independence of those companies has been greatly abridged, to say nothing of state-owned companies involved elsewhere in the canal area, which raise significantly greater questions. Additionally, I should point out that the understandings between President Carter and Panamanian leader Herrera, which were attached to the treaty and form part of the treaty, provide that the United States can, quote, defend the canal against any threat to the regime of neutrality. And I understand that as providing some degree of preemptive authority to intervene. One need not wait until the canal is actually closed by some act of sabotage or aggression, which, as we heard from the testimony, would be devastating to the United States. But there is some incipient ability to address potential violations.
And that includes building a bridge, the Chinese building a bridge and obstructing our potential means of travel. So the Panamanian government needs to understand that.
And your final point there leads to my last question, which is if the United States determines that Panama is in violation of the treaty, what is the range of remedies the United States would have for that treaty violation?
So I think it may be shocking to people to hear today, but when one goes over the ratification history and the debates and discussions in this body over this treaty, it was clear that the treaty was understood as giving both sides separately the right to resort to use armed force to enforce the provisions of the treaty. And it's not so surprising when one understands that the United States made an extraordinary concession to Panama by transferring this canal, which the United States built at great expense and maintained and operated, to Panama gratis. And in exchange, it received a kind of limitation, a permanent limitation on Panamanian sovereignty, that Panama agreed that the United States could enforce this regime of neutrality by force. Now, of course, armed force should never be the first recourse for any kind of international dispute and should not be arrived at sort of rashly or before negotiations and other kinds of good offices are exhausted. But it's quite clear that the treaty contemplates that as a remedy for violations.
It's very interesting. You know, the Panamanians, they want to let the Chinese start going in there, and you know, they want to overcharge our ships, but they're letting the Chinese go in there. I mean, you know, what's going on under the table is what makes me wonder. The United States built the canal. Jimmy Carter foolishly gave it away, but he did give it away under stipulation. And if those stipulations are not followed, if they're violated, well, then we have the right to defend the canal and take it back by military force if need be. So I'm thinking, you know, if we've got corruption down there, you know, let's investigate it. If you know, and if the Panamanians want to go so far as to, you know, let the Chinese build bridges, obviously that's gone way too far. Then take the canal back. Just, you know, it no longer be the Panama Canal. It, you know, be the American Canal. That's just kind of my thoughts on it. So, you know, what are you guys' thoughts on it? Anyway, hope you like this video. If you do, please like, share, subscribe. Any comments you've got, put them down below. And let's make America greater than it's ever been before. Thanks.